When I was 16 years old, my parents bought me a one-way ticket out of their lives. Last month, with their health failing, they begged me to come home, so I bought them a one-way ticket of their own. My name is Alina, I'm 29, and for 13 years I built a life on another continent, proving I could survive the silence they gave me. Now, with a single voicemail, they've shattered that peace. But before you judge the ticket I sent them, you need to understand the ticket they gave me first. Growing up, I wasn't the daughter my parents wanted. I was the third child, the afterthought, born 9 years after their golden boy, Marco. My parents, Clara and Robert, ran a struggling hardware store in a fatting Midwestern town. They valued two things: obedience and contribution. Marco delivered both. Star quarterback, honor student, the son who took over the store's books at 16. I was the quiet girl who loved languages, who spent hours with library books teaching herself French, then German. My father called it a useless hobby. My mother said it was a phase. To them, my curiosity was a character flaw, a distraction from the real work of stocking shelves and balancing ledgers. Marco wasn't just favored, he was the family's entire investment. Every spare dollar went to his college fund, every conversation orbited his potential. When I asked at 14 if I could join the school's exchange program, my father didn't even look up from the newspaper. "We're not a charity, Alina, we can't fund vacations." It wasn't a vacation, it was a scholarship. I'd won it, but explaining felt like begging, so I stopped. The pattern was a quiet erosion. Missed parent-teacher conferences because Marco had a game. Birthday dinners where my cake was store-bought and my brother's was homemade. A childhood of being politely, persistently overlooked. Then the summer I turned 16, everything cracked. Marco, 25 by then, was engaged to Lydia, the daughter of my father's biggest supplier. It was a business merger dressed up as a romance. The wedding was going to be the social event of our county, and I, according to my mother, was a problem. I was too shy, I didn't have the right clothes, I wouldn't know how to talk to Lydia's wealthy relatives. I was an embarrassment waiting to happen. The tension built in whispers behind closed doors. I'd hear my name, then a sigh, then in July, the incident. I had a friend, Leo. His family had moved from Berlin. We practiced German together. He was the only person who didn't look through me. One night we were sitting in his car outside my house, talking, just talking, under the streetlight. My father flung the front door open. He marched out, pulled me from the passenger seat, and accused Leo of things so vile I still can't repeat them. He called me names I'd only heard on TV. The next day, my mother laid it out. My behavior was causing stress before the wedding. My influence was negative. They had a solution. A great-aunt, Tia Rosa, my mother's aunt in Lisbon, Portugal, a woman I'd met once as a toddler. She was elderly, recently widowed, and needed live-in help. They had spoken to her. It was arranged. I would finish the school year abroad, they said, learn some responsibility, help family. It was presented as an opportunity, but their eyes were flat, final. I was 16 years, 4 months, and 12 days old when they drove me to O'Hare. My mother handed me a duffel bag and a sealed envelope. "Your ticket and instructions are inside. Don't open it until you're through security." She gave me a stiff hug. My father nodded from the driver's seat, already checking his watch. "Make us proud," he said. It was the last thing he ever said to me. Inside the envelope was a one-way ticket to Lisbon, a note with Tia Rosa's address and $500 in cash, no return date, no promise of a call, just a one-way trajectory out of their lives. I sat at the gate, clutching that ticket, watching families hug their kids goodbye. A cold realization settled in my stomach. This wasn't a study abroad program, this was an eviction. The plane took off. I looked down as America disappeared beneath the clouds. The quiet girl from the hardware store was gone. What was left had to be built from zero. Lisbon was a shock of light and noise and a language I didn't speak. Tia Rosa was not a gentle widow. She was a stern, sharp-eyed woman who viewed me as cheap labor. My room was a storage closet cleared out. My job was cooking, cleaning, and being her companion. There was no talk of school. When I asked, she waved a dismissive hand. "Your parents said you were done with that. You're here to work." I later learned they had sent her a monthly stipend, pocketing the difference from what they told me was a cultural exchange fee. For the first 3 months, I was a ghost. I wrote letters home, no reply. I called on Sundays when the rates were lowest. The phone would ring and then go to a machine. I stopped leaving messages. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in January. Tia Rosa had friends over. I was serving tea. One of the women, hearing my accent, asked why I was in Lisbon. Before I could answer, Tia Rosa spoke. Her parents in America sent her. Too wild, too much trouble. They needed a fresh start for her. The table nodded in sympathetic understanding. I stood there, the teapot heavy in my hand, and saw the story they had sold. I wasn't a daughter helping family. I was a problem they had shipped overseas. That night, I made a decision. If I was on my own, I would truly be on my own. I found a community center offering Portuguese classes. I traded English lessons for extra food. I saved every escudo from the tiny allowance Tia Rosa gave me. At 18, with the help of a sympathetic social worker, I secured a residency permit. I got a real job as a night cleaner in a hotel. During the day, I studied. I took the Portuguese university entrance exams as an external student, and I passed. I was accepted into the University of Lisbon to study translation. I sent one final letter to my parents with the news. It came back 6 weeks later, stamped "Return to Sender." The address was correct. They had moved and no one had told me. The final thread was cut. I built a life brick by brick, word by word. I graduated. I started freelance translating, then built a small agency catering to European tech firms. I met Joaquim, engineer with a laugh that felt like home. We married in a small Lisbon town hall. No one from my family was invited because I had no way to reach them and no belief they would come. For 13 years, I crafted a world of my own choosing, a world where I was seen and valued and loved. The girl from the hardware store was a relic. I was Alina Costa now, successful, independent, healed. Or so I thought, because the past has a way of knocking when you finally change the locks. And last month, it didn't just knock. It came screaming through the door in the form of a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, with a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. It was my brother Marco, and he wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because he needed something. And what he told me next would force me to make a decision I thought I'd already made years ago. The voicemail was 32 seconds long. My brother's voice, once so confident, was thin with a panic I'd never heard before. Alina, it's Marco. Look, I know this is out of the blue. Mom and Dad are in a bad way, really bad. Dad had a stroke. Mom's arthritis is so bad she can't cook for herself. I need help. I can't do this alone. Please call me back. A beep, then silence. I played it 4 times, sitting on my balcony overlooking the Tagus River. The sun was shining. My day had been planned. This was a grenade rolled in from a war I'd thought was over. I didn't call back that day or the next. I sat with the weight of it, a stroke, arthritis. The words were clinical, but the subtext was a siren. We need you. After 13 years of silence, I confided in Joaquim. His face darkened. You don't owe them a single phone call, he said, his hand over mine. They made their choice. I knew he was right, but a twisted, dutiful thread inside me, when I thought I'd cut, began to pull. I needed to know more. Not to help, but to understand the full picture, so I did what I do best. I researched. I started with social media. My parents had never been online, but Marco and his wife Lydia were. Their profiles were a curated gallery of upper-middle-class success, a new house in a suburb of Chicago, ski trips, pictures of their 2 kids. But in the last 6 months, the post had changed. Fewer photos, vague updates about family challenges, comments from friends asking, is everything okay, with no reply. Then I found a public post on a local community forum. Lydia 2 months ago asking for recommendations for affordable in-home care for elderly parents with complex needs. The comments were a list of heartbreakingly expensive options. That was my first clue. This wasn't just a health crisis, it was a financial one. I hired a discreet online investigator in the States, a former journalist I'd used for background checks on business partners. A week later, his report landed in my inbox. The summary was brutal. My father's hardware store had gone bankrupt 5 years prior. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house to cover Marco's own failed business venture, a franchise that collapsed within 18 months. Their savings were gone. Their only income was a meager social security check. My father's stroke had not been mild. It had left him with significant right-side weakness and speech issues, requiring full-time care my mother was physically incapable of providing. Marco, it appeared, was financially tapped out, his own resources strained by his lifestyle and the quiet bailouts he'd already provided. The investigator included one final note, a property record. The house I grew up in had a lien against it from a private care company. They were weeks away from a decision that would force a sale. The architecture of their disaster was now clear to me. They had invested everything in their son, and that investment had failed. And now, with the walls collapsing, they were looking for a backup plan they discarded decades ago. Me. The second voicemail came a week later. Marco's tone had shifted from panic to frustration. Alina, ignoring this won't make it go away. They're your parents too. I'm carrying this whole burden. The least you can do is answer the phone. The guilt was now weaponized. I felt a cold anger. He had lived a life of their unwavering support. He had taken their money, their energy, their pride. And now that the well was dry and the work was hard, it was suddenly a shared burden. I decided to call him. Not to offer help, but to state my truth. It was a short, brutal conversation. Marco, it's Alina. Finally, Jesus, look, we need to talk about. I know about the bankruptcy, the second mortgage, the lien on the house. A long silence. You've been spying on us. I've been understanding the situation you failed to fully explain. You said you needed help, you need money. It's not just money, it's care. Mom can't lift Dad, he needs to be moved, bathed. And you want me to do that from Lisbon's? No, we want you to come home. The word home felt like a physical blow. I have a home, Marco, it's here. I have a life, a business, a husband. Family comes first, Alina, or have you completely forgotten that? Family? I actually laughed, a dry, hollow sound. You have a fascinating definition of that word. You had a family for 30 years. I was just a tenant they evicted. That was a long time ago. They're sick, they're sorry. Are they? Have they said that, or are you just saying it for them? Another pause. He was cornered. Will you at least talk to them? Let them explain. Explain, the word hung in the air. What explanation could possibly cover a one-way ticket and 13 years of silence? But a part of me, the little girl in the storage closet in Lisbon, wanted to hear them say it. I wanted to hear the words from their own mouths. Against Joachim's vehement advice, I agreed. One video call, that was it. The call was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon, my time, morning for them. I sat in my office, my computer screen a black rectangle. Joachim stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel of support. The call connected, and there they were, my mother Clara, her face deeply lined, her hands twisted in her lap, my father Robert propped in a wheelchair beside her, one side of his face sagging, his right arm resting in a sling. He looked small, broken. The imposing figure from my childhood was gone. Marco was there too, off to the side, his jaw tight. Elena, my mother said, her voice a fragile whisper, you look so grown up. Hello, mother. My father made a guttural sound, his good hand lifting slightly. A tear traced a path through the stubble on his sagging cheek. The sight of it disarmed me completely. This wasn't the angry man who threw me out. This was a broken patient. Dad had his stroke in May, Marco said, his voice flat. It's been hard. I can see that, I said, keeping my tone neutral, professional. We need you, Elena, my mother blurted, her composure cracking. We can't manage. The nurses, they're so expensive, and Marco, he has his own family. We thought, maybe you could come for a while, help us get things in order. She was looking at me not with love, but with the desperate calculation of a drowning woman looking for a raft. Get things in order, I repeated. You mean sell the house, apply for Medicaid, find a state-funded care facility. My mother flinched, my father grunted, shaking his head slowly. Those places are terrible, Marco snapped. We're not putting them in some institution. That's what you need, I said calmly. You need professional full-time care. That's what an institution provides. You can't give that, Marco, and you're asking me to abandon my life to become a live-in nurse for people who… I stopped. The words "who abandoned me" were too raw, too big for this clinical conversation. For your parents, Marco finished, his voice rising. They're your parents, it's your duty. And there it was, the crux of it, duty. A one-way street that only ran when they needed something. I felt a clarity so sharp it was like ice in my veins. I have a duty to myself, I said slowly. To the life I built after you cast me out, I have a duty to my husband. You do not get to invoke duty now. You forfeited that right when you put me on that plane. My mother began to cry in earnest now, her shoulders shaking. We made mistakes, we were stressed, the wedding. The wedding, I echoed. You exiled me for a wedding, you sold me as a troubled teen to an aunt for a stipend, you cashed the checks and never called. Those aren't mistakes, mother, that's a choice. A series of choices that lasted for 13 years. My father was trying to speak, his words slurred and thick. Sorry, Elena, sorry. Hearing him say it, even broken like that, was a seismic event in my chest. But sorry was a word, it didn't rebuild the years, it didn't heal the abandonment, it was just a sound coming from a broken man. I hear you, I said, my own voice trembling now, but sorry doesn't change what you need, and what you need is more than I can give, more than I will give. Then what are we supposed to do? Marco yelled, leaning into the frame. Just rot here. I took a deep breath. I had prepared for this. The investigator's report had listed options. I had researched the laws. In their state, adult children could be held financially responsible for indigent parents' care under filial responsibility laws, but there was an exception, a powerful one. No, I said, my voice finally steady. You will do what millions of families in your situation do. You will apply for all the state and federal aid you qualify for. You will sell the house to pay off the lien. The proceeds, combined with Medicaid, will fund a place in a decent care facility. It won't be a palace, Marco, but it will be safe and professional, and it will not be my responsibility. You're sentencing them to a nursing home, he roared. You're asking me to sentence myself to a prison of their making? I fired back. I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm, not anymore. The screen was a tableau of their shock, my mother's stunned silence, my father's watery, confused eyes, Marco's furious, red face. I had drawn my line, it was firm, it was rational, and it was utterly devastating to them. I will do one thing, I said, the idea forming fully in that moment. I will handle the logistics from here, I will find the facility, I will coordinate with a social worker, I will buy the plane or train tickets to get them there. Consider it my final, administrative duty. I was essentially offering to manage their institutionalization, to buy them a one-way ticket to their new reality just as they had once done for me. The symmetry was not lost on me. It was brutal, it was poetic, and it was the only thing I could offer that wouldn't destroy the life I'd built. My mother stared at me, her tears drying. She saw the resolve. She saw the woman, not the girl. She gave the smallest, most defeated nod. Marco began to argue, but my father, with a great effort, raised his good hand and waved him silent. He looked at me, and in his eyes, beneath the confusion and the damage, I saw a flicker of something that might have been understanding, or maybe just exhaustion. The call ended, I sat back, my heart pounding. Joachim came and wrapped his arms around me. You were magnificent, he whispered, but I didn't feel magnificent. I felt emptied out. I had just negotiated the terms of my parents' surrender and my own. I had promised them tickets, but first I had to find the place I was sending them to. and that search would lead me to a discovery so shocking it would make me question everything I thought I knew about why they really sent me away. The search for a care facility began as a grim administrative task. It became an archaeological dig into a lie so profound it rewrote my entire history. Working with a geriatric case manager in Chicago named Anya, I began the process. We needed power of attorney to act on my parents' behalf. That meant documents, birth certificates, social security cards, marriage licenses. Marco, resentful but cornered, agreed to scan and send what he could find from their safety deposit box. The email arrived on a Tuesday, a PDF of scanned papers. Among the faded documents was one I wasn't supposed to see, one Marco likely didn't understand the significance of. It was a notarized letter from my maternal grandfather, dated the year before I was born, addressed to my parents. The subject line made my blood run cold: Instructions for the Rosa Trust. I read it, then read it again, the words blurring on my screen. My grandfather, a man I never met, had been a moderately successful accountant. The letter stated that upon his death, a portion of his estate was to be placed in a trust for the education of his grandchildren. It listed my brother Marco, and it listed me, Alina, by name, though I was not yet born. The trust was to be administered by my parents until each grandchild turned 18, at which point the funds would be released for tuition, housing, or vocational training. The trust was not huge, but according to the figures in the letter, my share would have been around $85,000 in the late 90s, enough for a full state university education with room and board. A scream built in my throat, silent and searing. A trust. For my education, I had a birthright. They had not just sent me away, they had sent me away and stolen my inheritance. Asterisk. The stipend they sent to Tia Rosa was a pittance. A diversion. They had taken money meant to secure my future and used it to erase me. My hands shook as I called Anya, the case manager. I asked her in the most clinical tone I could muster how one might investigate the dispersal of a private family trust from the 1990s. She was quiet for a moment. That's beyond my scope, she said, but I know a forensic accountant. He deals with elder financial abuse. This might qualify. His name was David. 3 days later, he called me with his preliminary findings. His voice was calm, methodical. Ms. Costa, the Rosa Trust was dissolved in November 1999. The funds were liquidated and transferred into a joint account held by your parents. The stated reason for dissolution filed with the trustee bank was beneficiary relocation and alternative arrangements. 1999, I repeated. I was 17. I had been in Lisbon for a year. Yes, shortly after your relocation, the bank would have required proof that the funds were being used for your welfare abroad. Given the amount, there would have been paperwork, receipts for tuition, housing. There were no receipts, I whispered. I wasn't in school, I was a live-in maid. David cleared his throat. Then the paperwork submitted was fraudulent, which makes this not just a breach of fiduciary duty but potential fraud. And given your age at the time and your status as a dependent sent abroad, the legal implications are significant. The rage that followed was not hot, it was glacial, a vast cold plain of fury. They hadn't just discarded me, they had monetized my disappearance. My education fund had likely bailout out the hardware store or funded Marco's wedding or bought the car they used to drive me to the airport. I sat in my office for hours, the Lisbon sunset painting the walls orange, seeing my entire life reframed through the lens of that stolen money. My struggle, my hunger, the years of scraping by, they weren't just the result of neglect. They were the direct result of theft. I didn't confront Marco yet, I needed more. I had David dig deeper into their finances from that era. The picture that emerged was one of quiet desperation. The hardware store was already in trouble by the mid-90s. The trust fund liquidation coincided exactly with a debt consolidation loan they took out. My money had plugged a hole, and when that hole reopened years later, they had nothing left to steal until they got sick. And then they tried to steal my freedom, my time, my life all over again. I now had a nuclear option. I could sue them. I could sue Marco as a potential accomplice for concealing it. I could report the fraud. The stress of a lawsuit would finish them. It would also be a black hole of time, money, and emotional energy. It would be revenge, pure and simple. And as I waited, I realized revenge wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want to destroy them. I wanted them to know that I knew. Asterisk. I wanted the truth to be the weapon. I wanted the weight of their own actions to be the punishment. I composed 2 emails. The first was to Marco. I attached the trust document and David's summary. The body of the email was just 3 sentences. You once asked what I owed the family. Here is what the family owed me. Explain this to them before I have to. I hit send. The second email was to Anya, the case manager. I authorized her to proceed with the application to Cedar Ridge, a decent Medicaid-accepted facility she had recommended. I told her I would cover the initial transition costs, including transport. I was buying the ticket, the one-way ticket, as promised. The fallout was immediate. Marco didn't call. He blew up my phone with 47 text messages in the space of an hour, a frantic spiral from denial to fury to pleading. That money was used for the family. You would have wasted it. Dad would have lost the store. You have to understand the pressure they were under. You can't do this now, they're sick. I'll sue YOU for defamation. The last text read, please don't tell them, it will kill them. He was right, it might, and for a fleeting moment I considered mercy. Then I remembered the teapot in Tia Rosa's apartment, the look on her friends' faces, the story of the wild, troublesome girl. They had crafted a narrative to justify their theft. They had killed my reputation to fund their failure. My compassion hardened back into resolve. I booked a flight to Chicago, not to visit them, to handle this in person, to look them in the eye one final time. Joaquim insisted on coming. This is not something you do alone, he said. I agreed. We landed on a bleak, gray November day. I hadn't set foot in Illinois in 13 years, the air smelled different. We rented a car and drove not to my childhood home, but to a bland chain hotel near the airport. The next morning, I called Anya. She had arranged a meeting at my parents' house with a social worker from Cedar Ridge for a pre-admission assessment. I would attend. Marco would be there. It was the stage for the final act. Walking up the driveway to that house was like moving through a ghost world. The paint was peeling. The garden was dead. It was a shell of the struggling but proud place I remembered. My mother answered the door. She looked at me, then at Joaquim behind me, her eyes wide with confusion and a flicker of fear. Alina, what you came? I said I would handle the logistics, I said, stepping inside. The house smelled of antiseptic and stale air. My father was in his wheelchair in the living room, facing a silent television. He turned his head with effort. His eyes met mine, and he began to cry softly. Marco emerged from the kitchen, his face a mask of controlled fury. You shouldn't be here. The social worker from Cedar Ridge will be here in 20 minutes, I said, ignoring him. This is my husband, Joaquim. The next 15 minutes were a tense, silent purgatory. My mother offered tea. No one drank. My father kept crying. Marco stared a hole through me. When the doorbell rang, it was a relief. The social worker, a kind-faced woman named Gail, began her assessment. She spoke gently to my parents, asking about their needs, their medications. My mother answered in a monotone. My father just nodded or shook his head. Marco interjected constantly, talking over them, minimizing their needs, arguing about the necessity of a facility. Gail handled him with professional patience. I stood by the window, a silent observer. Then Gail asked about financials, power of attorney. Marco produced the papers. As Gail reviewed them, I spoke for the first time since she arrived. Before we proceed, there's a matter of historical finances that may impact Medicaid eligibility, a trust fund that was dissolved improperly. The room went absolutely still. My mother's head snapped up. My father made a choked sound. Marco shot to his feet. This is not the time or place, Alina. It is exactly the time and place, I said, my voice calm. I looked at my mother. The Rosa Trust, my education fund from Grandpa, you dissolved it in 1999. Where did the money go? The color drained from my mother's face. She looked from me to Marco, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That was for, the family was struggling. It was for my education asterisk, I said, each word a hammer blow. You sent me to another continent with no means, and you took the money meant to give me a future. You stole from me. My father was now shaking his head violently, a guttural no bubbling through his slurred speech. Marco stepped between me and our parents. Get out now, you have no proof of anything. I have the trust document, I have bank records of the liquidation and transfer into your joint account 2 months later, I have a forensic accountant's report. I said this not to Marco, but to my mother, whose eyes were glazed with terror. I am not here to sue you. The statute of limitations may even have passed. I am here so you look at me and you know that I know. You didn't just get rid of a difficult daughter, you robbed her. And now you have the audacity to ask her for more. Gail, the social worker, had slowly closed her folder. She understood she was witnessing something far beyond a care assessment. Perhaps I should give the family some privacy. No, I said, this is relevant. Their financial history is relevant to their current situation. The money that could have provided for their care now was spent decades ago. On what, I wonder? On a store that failed? On a wedding? I looked at Marco. On a son. You vindictive bitch, Marco hissed. That's enough, Joaquim said, his voice low but firm, stepping slightly forward. He had been silent until now. You will not speak to my wife that way. The confrontation hung in the putrid air. My mother was sobbing, her face in her hands. My father was slumped in his wheelchair, his crying reduced to quiet, ragged breaths. The truth was in the room, a toxic gas choking everyone. I turned to Gail. Proceed with the assessment. Cedar Ridge seems appropriate. I will cover the initial transition costs as discussed. I have the tickets. I looked back at my mother. One-way tickets, just like the one you gave me. The circle is complete. I placed 2 printed first-class train tickets to the town near Cedar Ridge on the coffee table. Then I placed a sealed envelope next to them. Inside was a copy of the trust document and a single line on a sheet of paper. I know what you did. Without another word, I turned and walked out, Joachim at my side. I did not look back. I got into the rental car and we drove away. The deed was done. The tickets were delivered. The truth was delivered. I thought that was the end. I thought the story was over. I was wrong because my brother was not done fighting, and his next move would not be a phone call or a text. It would be a public declaration of war that would drag my quiet life in Lisbon into a blinding and very ugly spotlight. The bomb detonated 48 hours after I returned to Lisbon. Marco didn't call me. He went straight to the court of public opinion. He posted a long, emotional thread on a popular community forum, the same one his wife had used to ask for care recommendations. The title was, "My sister abandoned our dying parents after stealing their life savings." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He painted a picture of a devoted son struggling to care for his sick parents, betrayed by a greedy sister who lived a life of luxury overseas. He mentioned the one-way ticket to a nursing home. He mentioned my successful business. He omitted the trust fund, my age when I was sent away, the 13 years of silence. The comments section exploded. I was a monster, a sociopath. People offered to help Marco with donations. Someone found my company's website and began leaving one-star reviews. My phone started buzzing with alerts. Clients emailed asking cautiously if everything was okay. Joachim was furious. "We sue him for defamation now," but I felt a strange calm. Marco had shown his final card and it was a lie. He had made the conflict public, which meant I could now make the truth public, but I wouldn't do it on his terms. I wouldn't scream into a forum. I called my lawyer in Lisbon, then a reputable PR crisis manager. We crafted a response not as a defense but as a statement of fact. We published it on my company's blog, a platform my clients trusted. The post was titled "Setting the Record Straight, a Matter of Trust." It was dispassionate. It included scanned, redacted documents, the one-way plane ticket from 2006 with my 16-year-old name, the notarized Rosa Trust letter, the bank record showing the liquidation and transfer to my parents' account in 1999, a timeline from my departure to the recent voicemail. I did not call names. I did not accuse Marco of lying. I simply presented the evidence and stated that due to a history of financial misuse and estrangement, I had facilitated appropriate professional care for my parents as a final administrative act. I ended it with, "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is to ensure someone is cared for by professionals, even if you cannot be the one to provide that care yourself." Then we waited. For 2 days, the internet churned. The story was picked up by a few niche online outlets. The narrative began to fracture. Comments on Marco's original posts started to change. "Hold on, she was 16? That's not a savings account, that's a trust fund for her education. They stole from a minor and sent her abroad. What the actual hell?" The tide turned. Slowly, then all at once, Marco's fundraiser was flagged for review. The negative reviews on my site were taken down. I received private messages from strangers who had been through similar family estrangements, thanking me for speaking clearly. Marco, in a final act of desperation, gave an emotional interview to a local radio station. He cried, he talked about the stress of caregiving, he again called me greedy and heartless. But this time, when the host gently asked about the timeline about why a 16-year-old was sent to Europe alone, Marco stumbled. He talked about family problems and a difficult phase. It was weak, it was transparent. The host didn't press, but the damage was done. You could hear the doubt in his silence. Through it all, Anya, the social worker, was a steady professional. She updated me. My parents, shell-shocked by the confrontation and the ensuing drama, had signed the papers for Cedar Ridge. The train tickets were used. They were moved on a cold Tuesday in early December. Marco did not help with the move. He was too busy fighting his online war. A hired service transferred them. According to Anya, my mother was silent, compliant. My father cried the entire journey. Cedar Ridge was not a prison. Anya sent photos. It was clean, well lit with a garden. They had a shared room. It was an institution, yes, but it was safe. They had nurses, meals, physical therapy, more care than they had received in their own crumbling home. My financial involvement ended after the first month's transition fees as Medicaid took over. I had bought the ticket. They had arrived. The surprising detail came not from Marco or my parents, but from a name I hadn't thought of in years, Tia Rosa. She called me, her voice crackly over the international line. We had not spoken since I moved out at 18. She was now 92. "Elena," she said, "I heard a story from a cousin in America about your parents and a trust." I was stunned. "Yes, Tia." A long pause. "They told me you were a thief, a troubled girl who stole from them, that the money they sent was to pay me back for what you had cost them. That is why I was so hard on you." The world tilted again, another layer of the lie. They had poisoned my only refuge against me. "I never stole anything, Tia Rosa." "I believe you now," she said, her voice tired. "I am an old woman and I was used. I am sorry for the closet room, for believing them." It was an apology I never expected. It didn't fix the past, but it was a brick removed from a wall I carried. "Thank you for telling me," I said. We spoke a few minutes more about Lisbon, about her health. It was the last time we spoke. She died peacefully in her sleep 3 months later. Her apology was a gift that arrived just in time. With the public drama fading and my parents in care, a heavy quiet descended. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted, hollowed out. The battle was over and the battlefield was just empty. I had wanted them to know I knew. They knew. I had wanted to set a boundary. It was set in concrete and Medicaid forms. Now what? The answer came slowly in the rhythms of my real life. Joachim and I took a long weekend in the Algarve. I walked on the beach, the Atlantic wind scouring me clean. I returned to work to the clients who had stood by me. The woman who had faced down her family was not the girl who had been sent away. She was someone else, someone harder, yes, but also someone freer. The thread of duty had been severed not by me, but by their own actions years ago. I had just finally stopped pretending it was still attached. I receive a monthly email update from Cedar Ridge, a standard care summary. I read them. My father's mobility is slightly improved with therapy. My mother has joined a knitting group. They are stable, they are cared for. Marco never contacted me again. The last I heard, through the brittle grapevine of distant cousins, he and his family moved to another state for a fresh start. The final surprise was the most personal. Going through old boxes in our Lisbon attic, I found the duffel bag I'd taken to America. Inside, folded at the bottom, was the denim jacket I'd worn to the airport. In the pocket, my 16-year-old self had tucked a note. I must have written it on the plane. It said in messy, tear-smudged ink, "Someday I will be so far away and so okay that this won't hurt anymore." I held that scrap of paper from a girl who could only dream of the woman she would become, and I cried. Not for what I lost, but for what she survived. She did it. We did it. The story doesn't end with a dramatic reunion or a tearful forgiveness. It ends with 4 walls in a care facility a continent away and 4 walls in a sunlit Lisbon apartment. It ends with a choice to stop bleeding for people who never offered a bandage. I didn't get revenge, I got reality, and in that reality I found a peace that no apology could ever have given me. The door to that past is closed, I locked it, and I kept the key. So what is the price of abandonment? And what is the cost of reconciliation? My story isn't about winning, it's about accounting. A final, painful settling of books that were open the day I was given that first ticket. They added up the cost of my childhood and found it too high to carry, so I learned to carry myself instead. The research tells us that over a quarter of adults will face family estrangement, that millions know this hollow space where family should be, and so many of us are taught that blood is a debt that never comes due no matter how one-sided the ledger. But what does a child owe the parents who chose to stop being parents? What does an adult owe the architects of their loneliness? My answer was nothing. And then one train ticket. I didn't send that ticket for revenge, I sent it for closure. A definitive geographical period at the end of a sentence they wrote 13 years ago. Revenge would have been letting them drown in the crisis they created. Care was the one thing I could offer that didn't cost me my soul. It was the coldest kindness I had in me. If you're watching this and you see a piece of your story in mine, if you've ever been the discarded child, the scapegoat, the invisible one, I want you to hear this. Your peace is not something they can grant you. It is not hidden in their apology or their acknowledgement. Your peace is the life you build in the silence they left you with. It is the family you choose, the love you cultivate, the person you become despite them. You do not have to light yourself on fire to prove you are worth keeping warm. And if you're someone who can't understand a choice like mine, who hears this and thinks, but they're your parents, I would ask you to sit with a harder question. What does love require? Does it require endless sacrifice from the one who was never chosen? Or does it sometimes require letting go so everyone can finally face the truth of what was broken? I don't know if my parents will ever truly understand what they did. I don't know if my brother will ever see past his own resentment. That is no longer my work to do. My work was to survive them, and then to thrive without them. The one-way ticket was simply the receipt, proof that the journey they forced me to begin, I was strong enough to finish on my own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if it made you think about your own boundaries, your own definitions of family and duty, leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you have done? And if you believe that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and build a better door, then subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.